All right, I'll just give it a couple more seconds in case anyone has some delays getting in here. Looks like we have a good number of you who are participating. Okay, let's officially kick it off. So good afternoon. I am Kelly Fornell. For those of you who don't know me, CEO of Tech Manitoba, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to this month's Tech Mashup, How to Do Everything, a guide to dual-track Agile project delivery with online business systems. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the ancestral lands of Treaty 1 territory. And this is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. Tech Manitoba is a member-based organization that is here to serve you, our members, and assist in growing our thriving tech community. We are so grateful to the member organizations that support this community through participation, mentorship, and financial support. And I just now want to give a special thanks to our sponsors for today, Manitoba Institute for Trades and Technology, NTT Data, and as mentioned just earlier, Online Business Systems. To learn more about our sponsors, information can be found in the banners and on the networking floor. So we've also placed a link to each of their websites in the chat, which you'll find to the right of your screen. Okay, so right now, let's start. I'm going to invite onto the virtual stage our speakers for today, Adele and Dipanjan. If you want to turn on your cameras and your mics, that will bring you onto the virtual stage with me, please.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having us.
Hello, hello. Okay, so I'm just going to say a little here because I think it's really, really important. So Online Business Systems is a valued partner of Tech Manitoba and the Tech Mashup series. And I believe that we had a presentation from Tamara Olson about this time last year for one of our Women in Tech meetup groups. And it's so nice to know that we've got a lot of engagement out of you. Online is a like-minded partner in that they believe the Manitoba tech community is stronger, smarter, more innovative when we work and when we learn together. And so that's exactly what we're doing here today. So we're working together to empower our members, our community, and ultimately drive economic growth in our province. So I'm very appreciative and thankful for Online's partnership, but also extremely excited to have them join us today and provide this presentation to all of you. So I'll give a little background on OBS. Online is a digital transformation and cybersecurity consultancy firm. They're heading into their 36th year of business. So woohoo! I think that's a massive accomplishment. They are proud to be headquartered here in Winnipeg with Manitoba roots. And at the core, everything Online does is to help clients apply the best technology to tricky problems and lead them to their digital future securely. Joining us today from Online here on the stage with me at the moment is Adele Reeswartz, Principal Consultant for User Experience, and Dipanjan Munshi, Principal Consultant for Digital Transformation. Both Adele and Dipanjan are considered experts in the field of Agile project delivery and have been in the forefront of emerging tech for over 20 years. Before I turn the lunch hour over to them, just a reminder that this is an interactive presentation. Polling is going to be used as part of their presentation. So please be prepared to participate. And as always, if you have a question, please do so in the Q&A tab, which is at the top right, I think, of your screen. These questions will be asked at the end of their presentation. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Adele and Dipanjan of Munshi Online Business Systems to talk about how to do everything, a dual track guide to Agile product delivery. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Just gonna pop my screen on. Oh, this one. Here we go. Looks like everyone can see it. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about how to do everything. My co-host Dipanjan and I were a bit cheeky with the title because not only is this a great approach to getting products built, but we've also found so much of the philosophy applies to the activities in our personal lives. You may have heard about the dual track Agile process before. Gartner wrote about it as a way to incorporate lean UX, design thinking, and customer development into Agile development processes. The concept is founded in research, but what we'll discuss today is based on our actual experiences in bringing innovative digital products to life. I hope you'll find the content useful. We're going to keep it short and sweet, so there'll be lots of time to ask questions at the end. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Adele Rewards, and I'm a principal consultant and user experience architect with Online Business Systems. That means I primarily work with companies to get products off the ground by identifying that sweet spot between what users want, what can be built, and what will reach your business targets. This work is typically the work that people find hard to make agile, which is why I've paired up with our resident expert, Dipanjan Munshi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dipanjan Munshi, and you can call me DJ. I'm a senior agile coach and practitioner at Online. And I've been coaching organizations to adopt business agility for almost 17 years now. I work with a lot of cross-functional teams, enabling them to adopt principles and practices of lean and agile. I'm also a solution architect, which, if you ask me, is an interesting skill to have for an agile coach, because that actually enables me to bring real technical know-how and architecture knowledge to the team on ground and help them create scalable solutions using an agile framework. So I look forward to this session with you. Thank you. Back to you, Adele.
Thanks, DJ. So let's start at the top. Why does this approach matter? The last few years and even weeks have presented us with some very swift and very dramatic changes to the market, from supply chain disruption to the what and how people are consuming or purchasing our products, to the foundations of how we deliver them. But even when you remove the big name innovators like Apple and Google from the list, we're seeing top performers beating the index and actually accelerating out of the pandemic. Why is that? They took the same initial market hits as everybody. Why are these companies able to respond to market changes quicker? It boils down to being ready and being fast. Like any athlete training for the big game, you have to be prepared for agility. The thing is, there's a lot to consider, and that's usually where people get hung up.
And before we go forward, we would like to hear from you on what do you see as your biggest challenges in your organizations that prevents you from being ready or being fast. So if you can log on to Menti with the code that's shown on the screen and share your thoughts, you can share as many thoughts as you want, and everything would be anonymous. So we'll take 2 minutes and let everybody share their thoughts.
Fantastic. Set my timer. All right, DJ, I'm going to take a peek under the hood and see what we're seeing.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm just going to refresh. Oh, come on. Ah, there he is. So much to do. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Oh, forecasting. Scope creep. Don't want to be one of those.
That's a nightmare all the time.
Priorities, prep, scheduling, others. Yep. I like to say that work is sometimes that group project from college that you can never, ever be done with.
Yeah, and I think another interesting, important point is not prioritizing it well, because I see that as well.
Yeah, that's common. Communication is coming up right now as a big one. Looks like we've maybe tapped out on responses, DJ. What do you think?
There's some more coming.
Yeah, this is fun. We've got to get one of these in one of our workshops. So much better than dot voting.
I'm looking at each of them, and this all seem to be like my life.
Institutional readiness.
Oh,
true story.
Cool.
True story.
scheduling.
So what do you think, Dipanjan? Are there any surprises in there for you?
There aren't a lot of surprises. Yeah, I mean, like, it spans all across. You see, from organization to team to technology tools, everything.
Should we jump back into the presentation?
Let's do that. I think that's that's great input, everyone. Thank you. Now, here are some concerns that we often hear from our clients, and you would, there's no surprise that many of them basically mirrors what you just told us. So that's what we are going to do here today. We're going to talk about how do we address these concerns in the next few slides. That's what we're going to do. I'll hand it over to Adele.
Right. Yeah, so it's a lot, and it can lead to analysis paralysis, the condition that keeps you from getting started. So in this presentation, we're going to talk to you about a few tips for breaking that cycle so you can make sure that you're able to think long-term and get started. You're able to know when a stage is complete so you can advance, and how to deliver atomic learnable bits of product quickly. So let's start with your vision. There are different ways of examining it, and segmenting your thinking can harness the exploration into something productive. At the beginning is the explore phase. In this phase, you're imagining your future and refining the idea. What could it be? What problem are you solving? Is it the right problem? If you're a visionary or a founder, this is your sweet spot. The next type of thinking is discovery. This step is really crucial. It's making sure you have the right solution to the right problem. Sometimes we jump so quickly into building our great idea that we forget to make sure that anybody wants it. But your thinking doesn't stop there. If you've ever worked with a founder, you know that as soon as you start bringing their idea to life, they're off on the next idea, and it feels like you can never catch up. And you can't, and that's a good thing. It's important to recognize that as you're building to a future that's 5 years out, they need to be thinking about year 6, year 10, year 20. And as a founder, your team isn't behind. They're just building out the foundations. So that takes us to our next question. How do you know when you're ready to shift to the next mode of thinking? If you're like me, it can be really easy to get swallowed into a rabbit hole of ideas. And then this, and then that, and what about this? A wise software architect gave me 2 questions to stop analysis paralysis in its tracks. And I keep them on a sticky note on my computer. The first one is, do we need to know this now? How confident are we in what we know? What's our risk if we move forward? And we want to balance that with, can we learn this later? Do we need to know more in order to do the next step? Are we making a decision now that we can't work with later? I like to add a third little point to that is, would starting now actually help us to learn? These questions are incredibly subjective, so I'm going to give you a little metaphor to help you understand what I'm talking about. So let's say you're renovating your kitchen. Do you need to know which fridge you're going to buy before you decide on the cabinets? Certainly, a built-in fridge would have a significant impact on the design. What about a standalone fridge? You can just leave space for it and go, right? Well, like maybe it turns out fridge widths aren't standard. So you might say you want a 36-inch fridge, and so you build, one of those fridge cabinets to put your fridge in. But maybe your fridge is actually 36.2 inches. And if you want to have a fridge between your cabinets or build one of those fancy boxes, that's a decision you may need to consider up front. And plumbing too, that ice just doesn't make itself. And then all of this is dependent on how picky you are about the fridge style. Maybe the brand or the style you want only comes at a particular width. So You can certainly start your kitchen design with some of these options in mind, but you may need to run a parallel effort to identify any fridge dependencies before you can finalize the design. So once you've identified which parts of the fridge project or your digital product project you need to know now and what you can learn later, you're actually ready to get started. So I'm going to fast forward you to the end, right? You've started. How do you know when you're done? Because doesn't Agile mean you just go on and on forever? I mean, it's true, it can, because your product evolves and it's living and breathing. But the most important part about complete is understanding what it means to you and making sure that you and your team are on the same page. So when you look at something like a product roadmap, there's always these steps along that path towards maturing your reality to your vision. And there's two key acronyms that come up that seem to create a lot of confusion. The first one is MVP, minimum viable product. This is not your product, okay? It's your first lightweight attempt at learning from the market. You use this to make sure that people want your solution, that your team can support it, and it's feasible to build and maintain. So, like I said, it's not your finished product. It's like, you might call it an alpha version. You might call it a proof of concept. Some people even use something like a landing page or a Kickstarter as an MVP. And that's often confused with the term MMP, minimum marketable product. It's not a very common term, maybe because it's a mouthful to say, but it's an important distinction from MVP. This is the product that you want to launch. The first launch of this product, you might call a beta. At this step, you should already be confident that you're meeting the market, that you can support this, and that you can generate returns. Your product can and still evolve after this point, but this is usually the part where you give yourself a pat on the back and say, hey, I think we did it. So to illustrate the difference between an MVP and an MMP, I've got another little story for you. Once upon a time, there was an entrepreneur that wanted to create an app that provided users with ski conditions for the resorts they were going to. His first attempt was to see if anyone actually wanted it, and if, this is a pretty pivotal if the resorts would participate. So it was a completely manual MVP. He would call resorts up every day and then send the conditions out in an email list. So his first way to build his app, his first product that he launched wasn't an app at all. That's what an MVP is. Once he automated a few processes and released his condition information on a web page or on a mobile app, that was his MMP. In the next half of our discussion, Dipanjan is going to take you through the steps between, discovery, do we have the right solution to this problem, and launch of your MVP or MMP. Up to you, DJ.
Thank you, Adele. So far we have talked about how exploration and discovery helps us in planning long-term and starting early. And we have also talked about how important it is to set a definition of ready and a definition of done early enough so that we know when we can start with our build and when we can actually release it to the market. Now let's get to the actual building part of it, where you're building the product and trying to deploy it in the market. Now, all of you would agree, and we saw some of those concerns too, that there's so much things to do, because building a product isn't just 4 developers sitting in a closed room doing cowboy coding. There's so much of thought that goes into it: requirement specification, user experience, architecture, technology, security, so many stuff. Excuse me. How do we do that? How do we fit all of these, and how do we do all of these work in enough time so that we don't delay the deployment of the product? Now, what we have done here, if you see, there are 2 different sections called architect and build. So we have divided all these activities into 2 different sections. One is called the architect part and the build part. So the architect part is, in the architect part, we basically articulate a business or a technical requirement, a feature or a capability. And in the build part, we actually build it. Now, the build part is simply design, develop, test. This is because we want to address a recurring concern that we hear from our customers. Are we spending too much time in analyzing requirements and we are not implementing quickly enough? Or maybe, we are doing agile and we are cramming everything from analysis to UX to design to architecture, development, everything in an iteration, and we are not getting enough time to actually build the product. Our velocities are pretty low. So we want to answer those questions. We want to have a framework that will help us do everything, but still we should be able to deliver quickly to the market. Adele, if you can move to the next slide, please. Before we get into how we do that at Online, let's hear from you once again on what your take in your organization would be. When do you think you want to gather requirements, or when do you think you should validate your solution? Again, we'll do this through Mentimeter, and you can enter the code to log in. You would see a few options, and I know most organizations might have multiple ways to do development, architecture, and build. But if you just let us know what is your prevalent style, and we can throw that up on the board.
Awesome.
We'll take 2 minutes again. Because this is something I have heard in every single project that we have, that the developers are not getting enough time to develop, the testers are not getting enough time to test because we are doing so much. Or other projects where we are actually spending 6 months doing analysis and architecture, and we are way too late to enter the market.
Well, that's interesting because I'm on the other side. So I hear the same. We don't have enough time to design. Yeah. We're getting information too late to effectively incorporate it. Or you've done all this work and it wasn't developed.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe something changed. So something changed. There was a gap between architecture and design, or design and development that just meant that something became stale.
Yeah. No, if you consider that you are doing a 2-week sprint, how much can you put in a 2-week sprint, really?
So let's see what's going on. Ooh, look at this. It's a race. Don't have any waterfallers on this call, it appears. They've already drank the Kool-Aid. This is good. This is super good.
I'm not complaining.
This is a fun little tool, Mentimeter. I liked the little animation that we saw as it came up too. All right. I think we're probably close here. We can see a lot of people are always defining the requirements. There must be a lag, I guess, on the input.
Yeah, I think the refreshing lag.
All right. I like how the one is red, like our logo. It's very, we've planned this. It was branded. And honestly, do you think that one of these is right or wrong, Dipanjan? I feel like I was being a bit cheeky with these these options. You don't maybe want me to give you your final exam.
Well, I wouldn't say it's right or wrong in every context. Different product does need different treatment, but sometimes we do not use the right treatment.
Right. Okay, so. Right. And I mean, I guess we'll explain next the differences between these two options. I don't want to give away the surprise ending to the presentation. So I'll pop us back into PowerPoint here.
Okay.
Or the deck. got to talk in a little more modern with my terminology.
Okay, yeah. So we saw, I think that the choices were concentrated between option 2 and option 3. So this is the framework that we use in our digital product development projects at Online. Now, as Adele mentioned, this is adopted from Gartner's model, and it's popularly known as dual track agile framework because of the dual agile cycle. So you do see 2 cycles, right? So those 2 are 2 agile cycles, one for architecture and one for development. The first smaller cycle is for architecture. This is where we are defining the business and technical requirements for the product. And the bigger cycle is the development cycle, which is design, build, and deploy the product. Now, both of these cycles are running with their own cadences. So this is, and again, like I said, although this has been Gartner's, we have kind of picked it up from Gartner initially, but we have refined it across the multiple projects we have done. So what we have always seen is that the architect cycle and the build cycle, they don't run in the same cadence. It's not like 2 weeks, same start date, same end date. It doesn't work that way because mostly architects work on bigger things. So their cadences might be like 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and build works on smaller cadences. But that's totally dependent on the organization, but they necessarily do not have to work on the same cadence. But what the output of the architect cycle is what gets fed into the build cycle. Now that's a very, very critical thing. It's a very critical point because when architect cycle feeds into the build cycle, the know-how that goes to the build cycle, the amount of detail in the know-how that goes to the build cycle is extremely important. It cannot be too high levels so that the build team doesn't even know how to build a value-added product. And if we get to too much level of details, then probably the build team is waiting forever for the architecture team to deliver requirements and architecture and stuff like that. So when do we know the right point of handing over something to build? And that's what Adele was talking about. Are we ready? So important. Are we ready? And it doesn't mean that we have done everything when we hand it over to build cycle. No, I mean that collaboration keeps on happening, remember, because we are in an agile framework. So that collaboration keeps on happening. There would be unanswered questions which will be clarified as the build is progressing. But finding out that sweet spot as to, I think we have enough to start a build is important. Another critical junction is the other star that you see, are we done? So although you are running typically let's say 2-week sprint build, you are developing or delivering an increment at the end of every sprint. But it's not necessary that the delivery of the increment would be put into production or in the market right away. When does it get to the market is what the question of the when is it done, the done question addresses. So this is where the product owner along with the product sponsor and the team might have to decide, do we have enough requirement or do we have enough feature now so that we can take this to the market? Again, we don't want to go too early so that the customer gets turned off with non-functional and not good features, not useful features, and we don't want to go too late because then there's competition and the market changes and things like that. So what is that right point where you can actually develop or deploy the product to the market and be profitable, get ROI enough? So those two are very, very key. We will get into the details of what we do in the architecture and build, but I want you to understand the fact that any organization, whenever you start a product development exercise, those are the two things that we need to figure out. Maybe move to the next slide. Okay, let's look at each of the sections that the framework has. The first one is, of course, discovery. Adele did talk about it quite a bit. The discovery phase is mainly to articulate your vision of the product. What are we doing? Who are we doing for? Like, how can we make the customer happy and still have a profit made for our organization? These kind of questions. We want to know what do we want to actually deliver to the market. Because once we identify the vision, then we also need to make sure that the key risks and excuse me, assumptions are taken care of. We do activities to validate the key risks and assumptions. It might be preliminary sketches that you show to representative users, or maybe you do a market survey to see what the user wants, or maybe a competition research or other kind of research. But we need to validate that we are actually sending to market something that the market wants to use, the market has some appetite on. And then we know that we are on the right track. Once we know we are on the right track, we might want to do a quick MVP. And like Adele mentioned, your MVP might not have any IT components in it, or it might, very, very high level. But it's just to conceptualize what the vision is, and take it to a few people, maybe your what do you call them, the first responders or early adopters, and maybe your friendly customers, and you take it to them and say, this is what we are trying to build. Is this something like the guy in the ski app guy? Does this really help? Is this something that you're looking for? And MVP has to be done very quickly, and you don't spend a lot of cost to the MVP, because this is just a validation experiment. And then based on the feedback, you can establish some of the requirements, some of the features, what's the scope, and etc. Okay. Now remember, in the framework, it seems that once the discovery is done, you hand it over to the next phase, the architecture phase. But discovery may not end there. It might still continue. It might continue for a new vision, or it might continue from a futuristic perspective. So the discovery is continuous. It goes on. Exploration and discovery goes on. But from this point of view, because we now have a vision, we now understand what the vision is, we can hand over the vision to the architecture team to start their validation. We can move to the next slide. So once the discovery is done, we launch into this parallel architecture and build phase. Now, remember, this has to be in parallel. The architecture phase continues its work through multiple sprints. The architecture phase is also working in an agile manner. It's continuing, it's working in sprints. Sprints might have slightly longer cadence, but it's still working on sprints in time-boxed manner. What they're doing is they're trying to build the know-how of the system, the business requirements, the technical requirements. What is it? What are we going to use? How is it going to be modeled, etc. And this is then handed over to the build team. Now, the flow of information from the architecture team to the build team is continuous. That's important to understand. It's not that build team will have to wait. If the architecture team's cadence is, let's say, 6 weeks, the build team doesn't have to wait for 6 weeks. Every time the build team starts an iteration, which is like maybe 2 weeks long, so every 2 weeks, the build team should have enough information to start their new sprint. So the architecture cycle will have to continuously feed into the build team, make sure that they have enough to continue with at least the next couple of sprints. And again, this is so governed by, are we ready criteria. So that's so important. And I can't stress this enough. So that flow has to be very consistent. So in this architecture phase, we are basically trying to visualize specific experiences. Maybe we do a prioritization, and prioritization is an important aspect here. We know what is going to provide immediate value to the customer. Maybe the features, the experiences that provide immediate value and can be done with lesser cost, the low-hanging fruits, prioritize them, and then identify the functional and technical requirements and know-how that is needed to implement that. To validate that your understanding is correct, you might want to do some low-fidelity UX prototypes, some technical prototypes, or what we call as spikes, to validate those ideas. Now, remember, when your know-how goes from the architecture team to build team, there should be no unsurety in that. The information may not be complete. The requirements can be still, explained and discussed and things like that. But there should be no case where there's no exploration, no experimentation in the build phase. If we have already adopted a technology, if the architecture have adapted a technology or a particular visual design, They have adopted it because they know it works. Okay, so that's the responsibility of the architecture team. The build team will take it and develop it. So it's very important that all those maybe or probably are resolved in the architecture team. So that validation is important. And then the validated understanding is conceptualized using wireframes, visual designs, high fidelity prototype. And again, how much of this needs to be done is part of the are we ready consideration. And finally, we know after all this, we know what requirement and scope we need to deliver for this particular user experience. So once we think we have reached the definition of ready for this particular set of experience, we hand it over to the next cycle. And then we continue with either evolving that experience or a new set of experience or whatever the next priority is. We go to the next slide. Thank you. With the architecture cycle, the development cycle, implementation cycle continues in parallel. This is a typical agile implementation cycle, and most of you would be familiar with it. You design, you build, you test, you deploy. Right? You get the know-how from the architecture team. You align your scope to what the done state should be. So you're doing some prioritization here as well, which typically is done in terms of prioritizing the backlog. So the product owner does the prioritization. This is what we are going to deliver in the first iteration. This is what we are going to deliver in the second iteration, and so on and so forth. And then you prioritize, and then you create and define designs and code and test the whole 9 yards, and then deploy. Again, like I mentioned, you may or may not deploy it into production because you need to answer the question, is it done to deploy it in production? But you would still continue to deliver an increment at the end of every sprint. An important aspect that we have seen many project teams, product teams, and customers miss is that once something is out in the market, we treat that it's done and out of our scope now, and then we get busy with the other set of scopes, other set of requirements. But it's very important that every time we send something to the market, we measure it. We continuously measure how is it performing, like from technical aspect, usability aspects, viability aspects, ROI aspect. We just continuously measure, because the feedback we get, or the measurement we get, the metrics we get from the market is what is fed back to the architecture team to evolve. And not just the architecture team, sometimes those feedback actually goes back to the discovery or the exploration team. Maybe the market doesn't want this product anymore, or maybe there's a complete shift in the market's point of view, and we need to think something different. So it's very important to keep on measuring and then take that measure and feed it back into the architecture cycle. So this continuous process of two cycles running together and exchanging information is how we actually do, like in our experience, all the projects we've done, we do everything. We do requirement, we do design, we do UX, we do architecture, everything, but we are still able to deliver something in the quickest possible time. Like we have done it with as less as 2 weeks. So it's a very important way of delivering. And with that, I hand it back to Adele.
Oh, okay, great. That was awesome, Dipanjan. Thank you. So we've talked about the different types of thinking and doing and how to know when you're ready to shift modes. We've talked about how to layer them with your build processes to create progress across multiple tracks quickly. You can see a little bit on screen there. And all of this is important because you're able to see the world around you shifting and turning, so you can anticipate market changes. And you're making progress quickly with strategic opportunities to stick your head up and look around. If you've ever been on a sports team, your coach might have called this keeping your head on a swivel. So when we look back at all those considerations we had at the beginning of the call, the ones that were giving us analysis paralysis, we can organize them against these different segments and start to see a pattern of when we should be thinking about the answers to different questions. It might look something like this. Do you notice anything? as you get closer to the build phase, you need to start whittling down those unknowns. This really helps to create a lot of focus and give you opportunities to strategically come up for air. All right. Well, I hope that is very helpful. Thank you for joining us today. We're hoping that this will help you to be a little bit more responsive to the market and to maybe get some momentum behind your initiatives. If you have any questions, Dipanjan and I will stick around, and you could pop them in the chat, or our emails are right on the screen there, and you can email us directly. Thanks again for spending your lunch hour with us. Leave that on for a minute there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adele and DJ. That was really, really fantastic. I appreciate that you shared your knowledge. We got a little taste of the expanse of your knowledge on a really timely topic, especially given the world's experience with moving to a more online world because of COVID-19. So, organizations around the world are asking themselves still, like, how might we be ready? How might we be fast? I think that's a great question. And if they aren't asking it, right, we've got online business systems, to help out. So let's take some questions from the participants. I have to, own up to the fact I went to vote up a question. Someone had put in a really good question about measuring success. And I, instead of clicking the vote up button, I somehow deleted it. So I'm so sorry if someone put that question in. Please note that it's a great question, and I will very much ask it. You can retype it in if you want, but let's have a look here at some of the questions that we have here. So it looks like the top one really is, what can someone do to help their organization understand and adopt UX and Agile practices?
This is a good one, because honestly, it's probably, I would say, like the unsung work of working this way. I personally like to take a UX approach to it and try to understand where the other people are coming from, so that you can meet them where they are. I always feel like some UX is better than no UX. So just baby steps forward where people start to ask, who's using the product, and why are they using the product? Hey, can I talk to a user? Hey, can I talk to customer service? Like, some of those are just very preliminary first steps. And often there's just something, at a human level that's less of I would say it's less of an organizational barrier, but maybe more of a person with an idea of, or a fear of, or misconception of how UX will affect something on the project, which is why they're preventing you from incorporating it. Mm-hmm. So once you know what that is, you can kind of work with it. Just like it's not so different than the work we do on a product. It's like understanding what this person's trying to do, and then find a way to help them with your techniques, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. So I find it, and I have come across this multiple times. I'm more on the Agile side, and we have seen that in almost every customer we work with. To me, I'm not thinking of adopting Agile practices more so than adopting business agility. So I'm yet to see a business that says, no, I don't want to deliver faster. No, I don't want to deliver what the customer wants. The question is, if your organization buys into that yes, I do want to be business agile, I want to deliver quickly, I want to change as soon as the market changes, I don't know that you have an option other than using an agile methodology per se. So I think that's how I look at it. Sometimes adopting agile practices, sometimes we try to adopt agile practices for all projects. That may also be a deterrent, because some projects are not meant for agile. So a project like an existing software that's running, well and good, you are just making a few updates to it, it's not really a criteria for agile. So we have to also understand that non-agile frameworks are necessarily not bad. So we need to figure out, I'm saying this because this is a part of my training material everywhere, that there's a sweet spot for agile. But when it comes to development of new product, when it comes to development of a new service, I definitely think everybody wants to get to market quickly and be flexible to change as the market changes, and agile comes naturally. Okay, so maybe if you're a new organization is new to adoption of agile, you might want to start using the principles and the practice of agile more, and then slowly start adopting the more complex nuances of agile. But yeah, that's it's a journey. Agile is a journey. So
Yeah.
It makes me think of the poster. Every journey starts with a single step, right? And so your comment that you had in your presentation earlier about start small.
yeah, start small.
Start small. That seems to resonate. Okay.
Yeah, and you know what? It's I'm just gonna temper it with, it's not as easy as it looks. It does take some of those difficult, I don't even want to call them difficult, but do they just take some critical conversations to say, like, what is that small, viable place to start? But those conversations take an awful less time than, hiring 5 developers to build it out for 6 months and then realizing it wasn't the right thing, right?
Yeah.
So if you can get a few key people in a room, for a few hours and really get down to what's important, or maybe even do a little bit of research, it's going to be less of a headache now than it will be, 6 months from now.
Okay, let's look at another question here. Here's another really good one. Is there an optimal period of time that a specific sprint should stay within from one start to finish?
If it's a development sprint, usually 2 to 4 is what is suggested by all the agile frameworks, especially Scrum. Even 4 weeks is kind of too long for most projects. So most of our clients uses the 2-week cadence. So every 2 weeks, there's one sprint. For architecture sprint, it might be a little more because architecture normally doesn't deal with a small section of scope. It deals with a bigger scope. Mm-hmm. So the architecture sprints, we have seen them go up to 4 weeks. Like 4 weeks is typically what they use. So they have like a month to do all their stuff. But that's the general we have cadence that we have seen. But again, it depends on the organization how much you can, what's your appetite. But anything more than 4 weeks is too big.
Yeah, and I really find that 1 week sprints are a little too short.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are activities that you want to do as part of the sprint to start it off, organize the backlog, get on the right page. At the end of the sprint, you want to take some time to show people what you've done and test it. So you have 3 days, maybe 3.5 days to build something, which means you're making very, very atomic, very, very small bits of code that you're bringing forward. So, I find that 2 weeks is great. And even on the architecture side and design side, some of the ways I like to work are, let's think big. So you're looking at, let's say it could be several features, we'll call them an epic, or several things that are coming together like a landing page or one page of your experience. We'll work on this one part of it. And then you're trying to find which part of this can I get enough information about to give to development. So you might have some upfront, like a workshop to vision out the idea, and then you'll just, using that like dual track cycle, you'll just keep feeding little bits into development, and that also helps you to keep that architecture sprint from being a month. It's 2 weeks because we're just constantly getting something to a stage of readiness that a developer can start chewing on and bring into life.
Then it kind of turns from being a sprint into something that's more of like a marathon.
Right, exactly. And it's really hard. Those little time crunches, making something time boxed puts just enough pressure that people can time box their thinking or prevent things from going off track. I like calling people scope creeps. So don't be a scope creep. So some of that just creates just the right amount of pressure that allows you to stay focused. Mm-hmm. But it's not as rigid as development because it's just naturally comes with some flex, right?
Yeah. Those are all really good points. Here's the question that I referred to earlier, the one that I deleted by accident. What are some of the key metrics you use to measure success?
Oh, that's fantastic. You know what? Most of the time, I use what the client needs. So what do you need to be successful? However, when it comes to user experience, there are some really key metrics that you can look at, but they have to be supporting the business goal. So time on page used to be one that people really used for websites. But if your product is not, if that's not how you measure success, if you're trying to create efficiencies, then maybe it's a small time on page. I like to use, personally, I really love combination. So I love qualitative metrics. I love getting user research and getting feedback from people. But you can also pair it up with some apps. I'm just trying to think of some key metrics that they might have in them. So you could look at some general ratings on particular features or an experience. You can look on, again, how long are they spending on the page? Are they hitting certain buttons, right? Heat maps are really nice for that as well. There's some tools like Mouseflow or Hotjar that are really, really great for some of those things. They're kind of leading metrics though. So like, is your product successful? You're going to have like, am I making money? Are people using it? How many logins did we get? And then you establish a baseline and see if the changes you made, started pushing the target. So yeah, it can be really personal, but usually the customer success metric is somewhere between satisfaction, calls to the help desk that we're trying to reduce, and like, are we making any money?
Yeah, or registration for events, or
right,
something else that really is
Yeah.
of importance to the business. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about you, DJ? Any other thoughts about metrics for success?
Those are mostly it. Well, I mean, sometimes a simple survey, like how willing are you to recommend it to someone? Those kind of surveys also help. The important part is, like, even if we get quantitative metrics are always welcome. Like if I have a BI team, if I have a data science team, then I would actually go and look around people's Facebook and what they're talking about and things like that. But even the qualitative ones, as to if the customer is okay or completely rejects it, completely accepts it, what is the next feature that they want to see, things like that. Even that is an important input to have.
Right, where they fall off a process, if you're able to track those kinds of touch points within a process, like a shopping cart, for instance, if when you're seeing people sort of fall off the cart process, when are they abandoning their cart? What's in the cart when they abandon it? If there are any trends in there. But I don't know if that would be a common KPI.
How many people are installing and then deinstalling if it's an app from the App Store, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or if they download it, but they never open it again, right? So
they
haven't even taken it off their phone, but they just don't open it. Yeah. It's interesting too. And part of that, is about educating your clients as well, right? So thinking about one in the past who was very much about, I just want to know the metrics of how many have been downloaded. It's like, well, that's great, but the next step should be how many are actually using it. Yeah. So
we typically we look at early adopters. Like early adopters are people who would not shy away from telling us what they feel, right? Yes. They would like to take it, try it, and they would say, this is nothing. I don't even like it. So they can say that. So those are some people we'll look at, like, give us some feedback, maybe a beta release like MMP.
Yes.
To get some feedback from them.
And to that earlier point where somebody was really interested in, I want to get to track the downloads and that's it. That's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
So there's this interesting, like, get as much data as you can, right? Like, it's always like, sure, whatever we can get. But I always find that the data has to lead to the action that you're hoping to take. So what are you going to do with the data? What is your definition of success of this project, or what kind of decision are you looking to make? Like, ideally, you can you should be tracking across quite a few, areas, but you'd really need to make sure you're focused on what's going to help you make really good decisions. Otherwise, it can lead to a similar analysis paralysis, but now you're on the BI side. Like, I've got all this data, like this correlation equal causation, and then and you're like, okay, I don't know what to do now because I've got too much of it. And we end up taking a similar user experience approach to your data and say, okay, what are you trying to do? Let's backfill that with, these are the ones that are going to lift into your KPI.
Yeah, all great points. So this next question, I love it so much. So this is one that I think many people can relate to, and I'm sure this is a reoccurring one in your worlds. How do you know if projects that started as Agile but quickly turned into Waterfall, is that due to lack of communication? So, I see DJ, you're laughing already. So you have lots of experience.
Yeah, I've seen so many of them. So there are some very, very standard anti-patterns of Agile, and that's why the dual Agile works so well for us. Or else if you put everything in a development sprint, people go, let's do the requirement, let's do the design, let's do the development, let's do the testing. Well, then you are not doing Agile anymore. You're basically doing Waterfall in many cadences. Like that doesn't work. Generally, the way I see it is, Agile is all about outcome. What is the final outcome? If you are delivering value to the market every 2 weeks, let's say your cadence is 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, some sizable value, considerable value, I think you are pretty much Agile. Now, there may be a lot of room for you to increase that value, but if you are delivering value, then you are doing something right. Now, if you are not delivering the value, or if you think that you are delivering lesser value than you should be able to, then there are some anti-patterns going on somewhere. So that's when we step back and start taking a look on, do you have a right definition of ready? How long are, how much of, so if you might, during sprint planning, you might be taking in 5 functionality and you might be only delivering 3. And if that's a repeated pattern, then there's something wrong between planning and delivering. Or maybe we are getting to a point where we are delivering something, but we cannot show enough value to the stakeholders. So those are the points where we have to go back and look at, are we following the Agile principles, or where are we failing? Communication is definitely a big issue in Agile projects, because Agile projects needs a lot of communication. And it's not easy. It's very, it's high, like I mentioned, it's high pressure from day one. And you need your product owner all the time, you need your stakeholders all the time. So if communication is an issue, if the project's not talking to each other, then that's when we actually, that's what my bread earner is. So that's when somebody like a coach would step in and try to identify, weed out what are those key constrictions, key kinks in the process. But it can be anything, really.
Yeah, I find too so I don't think waterfall is the bad word that sometimes people make it out to be. And I like your point, Dipanjan, about just really focus on the outcome and what you're trying to achieve. But some of the things that I see that derail people are being able to time box their thinking, right? And if you're working inside of the organization, I've worked, like product side and consulting side. And so when you're on the product side, you're dealing with different politics internally to, navigate getting something done, right? And when you're, sometimes you just need like that outside person to come in and be okay, I think it's time to wrap it up. Like this is the hour. And all of a sudden everyone's like, okay, I get it. But if I'm in there and I'm talking to, let's say Dipanjan and I are working on a side project, we're going to have a different, maybe like understanding of authority, and it can really like balloon up fast because everyone has ideas, and then there was a bit of a seniority structure that sometimes comes into play where it can kind of shift to less do we need to know this now, and how are we going to learn this, and how can we prioritize this and bring this into atomic chunks, as much as like, yes sir, I'll get that right away, sir. And so it's one of those things that we just have to always keep ourselves in check, which I think is why they have a lot of those like built-in checkpoints into Agile. So it keeps everybody kind of working together within a process. And I found like Dipanjan's come in on a few of my projects to be a coach. And it really helps get teams off on the right track. I have to say, like, it's like having a therapist with you right there. And they're just like, okay, well, let's explore this, and let's like maybe put this aside. And yeah, it's it can go off the rails pretty quickly with little chatty people like me on the call, right?
So start with your outcome in mind, and
So if your outcome is good, like if you are delivering value, you're doing something right. I mean, it can be improved, but at least we are not failing with our implementation. We can go from there, but if we are not, then of course we need to look into what we are doing, and it can be the not can be anywhere. Maybe the product owner isn't strong enough to push back the CEO or the director saying, no, this is what we are going to deliver. That's it. Or maybe the Scrum Master isn't, doesn't have enough knowledge and doesn't understand what's stopping its team from being productive. So it can be roles. It can be there are members in the team who are not conversant with the Agile process. They want to sit in their desk and just code and not really interact with other people. Agile is a very collaborative process. There can be so many things, and I guess that's when we find out what's wrong.
But I think some Agile is, like I say, some UX is better than no UX. Some Agile is better than no Agile, and you kind of like can build that process up, and you can build it. And I find it actually changes the culture of an organization as well, because of the collaboration, there's a sense of ownership and employee engagement, and you can't help but go to another project and try to also be just as collaborative and open to feedback.
What I'm more worried about is something called as Agile, which is Waterfall Agile. That's a no-no.
Yes, I think there's been some experience by many people with that.
That's a slippery slope too.
Yeah, we have a question here from Lubna in chat. So the question is, how do we know whether Agile methodology would be right for a particular project? So you've got your outcome in mind, and now you're thinking about methodology. So what are the criteria?
So this is from my training course as well. So I'll take that. So we do, in a very, very high level, we say Agile is the sweet spot for any project that has a lot of unknowns.
Okay.
Right. So if you think about a chart which has like maybe requirements are unknown or technology is unknown, anytime something is unknown, Agile makes a big impact. If everything is known, like I know the solution, I know the requirements, they're written down, signed off, no change, regulatory apps, right? The requirements are what the government has published as regulations, so nothing can change. Those are not really good spot for Agile.
Right.
But other than that, anywhere where you have an unknown, especially in product development, everything is unknown because you don't know how the customer reacts. That's where Agile works very well. I mean, at a high level, that's how we do a quick assessment.
It seems like kind of a conundrum in that if there are lots of unknowns, people then tend to want to cling to that linear process with things mapped out and every, risks mitigated. So how then, what's the approach that's necessary to get them on side with embracing that unknown?
So that's that's a very popular fallacy that, if I do a long waterfall project, I will know what I don't know.
Right.
You won't, because you're meeting the customer at the beginning when you're taking requirements. The customer has told you what they know, and that's all you know. And that's the same with dual track as usual, as well. Like we in the discovery, we know what we know, But in case of a dual track agile, or in any case of any agile project, you are constantly in touch with the customer. You are delivering something, seeing their feedback, delivering something, seeing their feedback. So at some point of time, the customer goes, think of all the projects that started before the pandemic. The moment the pandemic hit, everything went different, right? So we don't want to do a 12 months project that started before the pandemic and we doggedly kept on doing what we have decided 12 months ago, and then we launch a product and nobody uses it because the pandemic has changed the world, right? So that's an extreme condition. But in Agile, you would know more for sure, because you would know more than a waterfall project, because you would know at any point of time you're going to the customer or your sponsor or your stakeholders, they're telling you this is not what I need. This was my need 2 months back, but now it has changed. This was my need 5 months back, but now a competitor has come up with a more advanced feature, so I want to go there. So that's why if there are unknowns, it's always way easier to follow Agile.
Yeah, and it is counterintuitive to do so, like you guys mentioned. So I find that the discovery aspect, so a lot of people, this is human nature. I've got an idea, and they really, really focus on the idea they want to have to solve a problem. If we can start to separate in the discovery aspect, what's the problem you're trying to solve with this idea? And you can make that process of discovery very transparent, right? With any research you're doing, surfacing the learnings on a regular basis and starting to really like do discovery in an agile fashion. I'm going to say in an agile fashion because I don't want to get added if it's not like, it's not true discovery or not true agile because it's discovery, but you could still do it in small learnable bits. Take that back and see if you need to pivot or if you can still move forward. That starts to show the value of what you're doing, because even if you were doing a waterfall project, you'd have to do some analysis, right? So now if we do the analysis quick and atomic and we're showing them what we're learning as we go, and that person who's holding their cards to their chest is sharing and contributing and seeing how things come together alongside the team, it just takes a few weeks. All of a sudden you realize, wow, like I can trust the process a little bit. And I find that that's just kind of like doing it by the demonstration of it really helps when people are having challenges. I mean, you can't take the cards from their chest, but you could start having a conversation and let them put one or two on the table at a time, right?
Yeah, the adage of learn by doing.
That's what Agile is in a nutshell.
If you're that kind of person, Agile is for you. That's probably the other thing is like, you're like, hold on, let me try it out. Let me grab my whiteboard and like just sketch this out quick. Yes. You're probably ready.
Okay. Well, that was the last question that we had. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, DJ and Adele. It was a very, very informative presentation. You gave lots of information for us all to digest. And for those who are, listening in, if you have any questions for Adele and DJ and online business systems, we'll place their contact information in the chat, which I think it's there already. Yeah. And they'll be around for, a few more minutes following today's session on the networking floor. So Adele and DJ, again, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to connect with online business systems and for me to meet you for the first time through this event. And I would say thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful having you host today's session.
Well, thanks for having us. It was our pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So now I'm just going to give a little bit of information about some upcoming events. We've got some really good things that are coming on, and then we'll switch over to some final networking. And then that wraps up our event for today. So next Thursday is Tech Manitoba's premium annual event, which of course you're very familiar with, called Disrupted. It's very much a leading force in uniting the tech community here in Manitoba. It is a conference that places an emphasis on education, business connection, inspiration. We have internationally recognized keynote speakers. We have breakout sessions, networking opportunities. It is a catalyst within the province for our tech ecosystem. So again, that's March 24th. And then we have a second event for Disrupted, which will be focused on innovation within financial services and technology, and that will be on September 29th. I think we've got on our website, or at least we did a few weeks ago, that the second event was going to be in June, but we've moved that back to give more time and to let people be able to fantasize about the upcoming summer, and then we'll crack into the second Disrupted on September 29th. So Disrupted on the 24th of March starts at 8:30 in the morning. It takes a look at ag tech. So we're really focusing in on local solutions to global challenges, right? So even thinking about the awful situation in the Ukraine, one of those breadbaskets of the world, let's really explore how technology through the eyes of entrepreneurs, researchers, and true disruptors is helping to make a difference in feeding the world. So at times when things are very much disrupted and not in the best sense, with supply chain issues like with what's happening with the humanitarian crisis and the war in the Ukraine, let's focus on positive things that are happening here so that we can, again, help to keep feeding the world. We are excited to feature keynote speakers of Justin Kingsley. He's a best-selling author and creativity strategist. And then, of course, we've got a local celebrity, Wade Barnes, CEO of Farmers Edge. So if you're not familiar with Justin Kingsley, you're wondering, like, what does he do? A better question probably is, what doesn't he do? He is a New York Times bestselling author, a storyteller, a strategist, a creative director, photographer, and a former press secretary under Prime Minister Paul Martin. He's been named one of Canada's most creative people by Marketing Magazine, and he served as creative director for NHL Superbrand, the Montreal Canadiens, turned Star Wars and Indiana Jones into global museum exhibitions, put a McDonald's into the side of a mountain at a snowboarding competition, and he's developed award-winning communication strategies for UFC champs and slogans for the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup. That is quite the bio. So again, join us to hear from him. He's going to have really inspiring things regarding entrepreneurship. Wade Barnes from Farmers Edge. Since starting the company, he quickly has become known as a real motivational force in the ag sector. And facing disruption head on, Wade bridged technology with agronomy to lead the development of this really innovative connected digital ag ecosystem, which is in support of global sustainability and food traceability. He is a seasoned leader with an entrepreneurial spirit and deep agronomic roots that keep his sights on the needs of farmers and agribusinesses worldwide. So we're going to have other things during Disrupted, such as innovation bursts from entrepreneurs and thought leaders who are using and talking about their unique approaches and applications to change the landscape and the province and beyond. So I would love to have you join us, and promise this is not an event that you want to miss. There's information, registration details placed in the chat to the right of your screen. As well, we'll have information on our website. Our next Tech Mashup feature will be brought to you by one of our wonderful members, Ron Cantaveros of the David Applin Group. Ron will join us on April 12th with Everyone is a Recruiter presentation. If you're on LinkedIn, you will see that everyone truly is hiring as the competition for finding tech talent continues to be fierce. How do you make your "we're hiring" message stand out? And in this Tech Mashup, you'll learn strategies to create compelling and engaging messaging for LinkedIn. Ron will give you tips, tricks, and hacks to get the most out of your LinkedIn posts and strategies to consider when working with a recruiting firm. And there's always more fun in store with Ron. And it's best for anyone that has capacity or responsibility for building teams and hiring talent. Again, event information, registration details are listed in the chat. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Adele, DJ, Online Business Systems, thank you, thank you, thank you. The networking floor will remain open for a few minutes, so please take this time to continue networking. Enjoy your afternoon, and thank you so much, everyone.